Okay, so that wrapped up our monetary policy and our condensed part 3. We're going to start going into part 4 now. So part 4 on the syllabus does a couple of things. First of all, it allows us to kind of combine monetary policy into our look at economic growth. So something that we hadn't looked at really before, we had talked about growth in terms of capital, but we didn't really talk about things like monetary policy and the impact that might have. So we're going to be able to build a model called the ISMP model that allows us to bring monetary policy into growth. Part 4 is also kind of our wrap-up part in our macro section, just kind of touching on some of the other topics that, again, maybe fit better in a principles class if you took principles, and then adding on to them with some macro components. So it's kind of our end-all, be-all, catch-all kind of section. So we've got a few different things to do in this section. And we'll see what we get through and what time and quarantining, filming and stuff allows us to do, and what we get through, we get through. So like I said, we want to kind of start building what is known as the ISMP model. And it actually, in order to get to the ISMP model, we have to do another model first, because this IS portion of the ISMP model is actually a derivation model. And so in order to understand where IS comes from, we actually need to look at what is known as an aggregate expenditure model. So that's kind of what I want to start with. So again, in part 4, we'll definitely see some more of these aggregate models, depending on how far we get into material. And again, we get to what we get to, we'll make do with the semester as it is. So we want to look at this aggregate expenditure model. This model is also sometimes referred to as the Keynesian cross model. So, it kind of goes back to early in the semester. We mentioned John Maynard Keynes. This was kind of the model that he devised that represented economic growth. And one of the reasons that he liked this model is it was capable of both showing short-run effects and long-run effects to some measure. We're, again, going to take kind of shortened views. This model would have some calculus. I'm going to take the stance that I took in a lecture or 2 lectures or whatever videos ago, that I just think calculus might be incredibly challenging to teach in this format. So we're going to do a more algebraic approach, which is totally fine. So that does kind of limit, especially on some of the short-run analysis that we could do, but it's still going to work, so I think we should be okay. So in this aggregate expenditure model, Keynes really highlighted on that consumption component. And we've talked a couple times this semester about how important consumption is, that people spending money is really truly the driving force of the economy, right? We said consumption makes up about 70% of all GDP. We are seeing the impact of reduced consumption immediately. And I know whenever we talked about recessions, we said that consumers don't have to stop spending for very long before a recession kicks in. That's why the Federal Reserve made quantitative easing last Thursday, or several Thursdays probably by the time you watch this video now. That's why the Federal Reserve engaged in quantitative easing, because right now consumers are not spending money. People are staying in their house, we're not going out, we're not shopping, we're not buying as much gas, we're not buying as much groceries, except for maybe toilet paper and hand sanitizer evidently, which you can't eat, so that's kind of odd. But effectively, we're not spending money on entertainment. Our consumption has fallen considerably. And we know that this is going to have some impact on the economy going forward. Well, Keynes kind of took that same view. He said, hey, consumption is everything. Consumption is really the root of the entire model. All the other variables are just there to kind of add to it. So that's the approach that he kind of looked at. And so he wanted to ask, what causes or what drives consumption? So if I actually had a class now, This would probably take about 10 or so minutes because we would kind of banter and figure out some answers on what causes consumption, but without anyone, this is probably going to take 30 seconds. So that would be my question to you. What causes consumption? And one answer we get right off the bat. We get the most obvious, we always get the best answer right away. Income. Income causes consumption. People will spend money if they have money. That makes absolute and total sense. I want to do a slight twist on income, and this shouldn't be too much of a surprise because, to be honest, it's the same twist we used early in the semester. I want to say I don't want to focus on just income. I want to think about disposable income. Just a little quick note. I use the variable DI to stand for disposable income, which is different than the textbook. The textbook uses YD. The reason I use the different variable is not just to confuse you with the textbook, it's just if you go through the textbook, how many Y variables are there? There's Y, there's Y star, there's Y over L, there's YD, there's YP. There's so many Y variables, and that's why all semester I've always kind of tried to just kind of make up my own thing just to avoid some confusion. But if you are following along in the textbook and you see YD, it is referring to disposable income. Okay, so a quick definition, and from the definition we'll make a math equation. Disposable income is what is left of income after paying out taxes and receiving any transfer payments. So effectively, your disposable income is the income you receive adjusted, so minus taxes plus any transfers that you get. So again, remember from early in the semester, transfers are going to be things like Social Security. So if we have someone, maybe they make $100 at their job, but they pay $20 in taxes, and they receive $30 in Social Security income, right? So their disposable income would be 100 minus 20 plus 30. Again, not keep these kind of separated out. So 100 minus 20 is 80 plus 30. The DI in this case would be 110. So disposable income is your income after any adjustments for taxes and transfers. Perfect. Okay, and so we would say, well, how do we expect disposable income and consumption to interact? I have two variables, which means I can graph that. I can put one on each axis. So maybe down here I'll put, for now I'm just going to call it income, because it doesn't matter at this point if we're talking disposable or total, just for now. And then up here I'm going to put spending. Right? Consumption is a form of spending. And I think this is kind of a no-brainer. If you have low income, you're not going to spend very much. If you have high income, you're going to spend more. And we definitely see that a direct relationship exists between income, and thus disposable income, and consumption spending. That tells me right away that I expect this to be an upward sloping function measured in this model. Okay, so while I think disposable income in general maybe is probably the most important factor in determining consumption, it's not the only factor in determining consumption. So again, I would at this point throw it out to the class, and we would start getting some other answers about things that might determine whether or not you spend money. And yeah, we could come up with probably a pretty good laundry list. One that I always get is people always say like savings. And I say, well, let's kind of be careful here, right? We're looking at a model for spending. So I always say, well, where does savings come from? So I kind of just do, where does savings come from? How about something like past income? Okay, well now we're making progress. But that's not the only place money in your savings account could come from as well, right? Like you could get an inheritance, you could get a gift, you could win the lotto. There's all kinds of other ways that you could end up flush with cash, right? We call all of these, just kind of scribble that out. We call all of these effectively wealth. We use the variable lowercase m for wealth. I have no idea why, but don't worry about it because you're not going to have to do an equation with it. But just in case you ever see it, that's the variable for it. Wealth refers to your ability to spend even if income is zero. Wealth refers to your ability to spend even if income is zero. Okay, I definitely think we've probably got the two big ones that maybe impact spending. There also, by the way, could be a couple of other ones, that impact spending. Maybe something like future expectations. Yep, totally seeing that right now. I guess the best logic that I have on this is that people think that they're going to be trapped in their houses for months at a time and thus not able to get toilet paper. So your expectation is that for some reason you won't be able to leave your house. So what are you doing? You're buying a lot of toilet paper now. And again, you're not actually factoring in your income and wealth into that decision. Okay, so sure, okay, that could work. I bet you the interest rate, in fact, I know that one's going to be important later on. We've already talked again about that. At low interest rates, we're much more likely to engage in spending. Now, maybe even beyond something like buying a house, but buying a car, we're much more likely to buy a car at low interest rates. Going on vacation, by far, much more likely on low interest rates. So again, we have some impact of consumption that is not income. That's actually important. All of these factors lead to what we call autonomous consumption. We use the variable lowercase a to stand for autonomous consumption. And we actually will use that variable, so write that one down. Autonomous consumption will capture any spending in our model that is independent of income. Autonomous consumption will capture any spending in our model that is independent of income. Okay, so let's combine this idea and this graph, right? We know we're going to have a direct relationship. We know that there's going to be some spending even if income is zero. We can do that, right? We can add these up. And we can show a function for consumption. Okay, so I need some measure of spending, meaning a positive value on the vertical axes, even if income is zero. So there's zero, go positive up, right there. I know that I would spend some money independent of income, based probably on wealth, but maybe on future expectations and definitely on the interest rate. This distance from the origin to whatever that intercept is our autonomous consumption. So this value here is A. After that, we expect consumption to follow our idea there that, hey, as income rises, I would spend more. Gosh, I don't know why I chose that slope. It looks kind of like a 45-degree-ish slope, probably, maybe. But that's going to be actually important. This function represents, I'm just going to give it a C for consumption. This represents our consumption. That slope actually kind of is important. We call the slope the marginal propensity to consume. So I just, for art purposes, kind of made a nice, pretty 45-degree, but it actually would have a meaning. So again, this slope is marginal propensity. Sounds out, so we're going to go with it, to consume, which we abbreviate MPC.